Oysters play two very important roles in the Chesapeake Bay. They're ecosystem engineers, which means that they actually build habitat on which other organisms can live, but they're also the water filtration system for the bay, so they help keep the bay's water clean. Conservation paleobiology is a relatively new subdiscipline, and the idea here is that we're going to use information from the fossil record to help us predict and understand changes in biodiversity as a result of global warming or as a result of various different human factors. All of the work I'm doing in the Chesapeake Bay is focusing on the fossil record of the last million years. So most of the oysters that I work with are somewhere between 500,000 and 50,000 years old. We use a technique that's called bulk sampling. We divide the outcrop, or the cliff, into a grid system, and we randomly select which cells of the grid we're going to collect, and we go out and we collect a big bulk sample of all of the sediment and all of the shells in that one grid cell.
The first part of the process is to remove them from the matrix usually that they're in. It's usually a sandy, silty, possibly clay matrix that they'll be in. And that's done here downstairs in the rock room. We just basically use water to remove them from the matrix, and then after that we collect data on their shell heights, and after those measurements are collected we'll come down and use the tile saw, and that will allow us to bisect the hinge of the oyster, and with that you're able to access the growth bands, which will give you the biological age of the oyster.
These oysters from the modern aren't living till their full adulthood. They're basically being harvested when they're very, very young, or they're dying from disease or over-sedimentation. Whereas in the fossil record, we get oysters like this that live to be upwards of 30 years old. As oysters age, they grow less and less and put more and more energy into reproduction. So over maybe the period that this lived, produced far more offspring than 10 of these could produce in the 3 to 5 period that they were living. And so in the modern, what we have are these oysters living in highly stressful environments, that they put most of their energy into growing as quickly and as fast as possible in order to survive, and very, very little energy into reproduction.
The fossil data have many implications for modern restoration and mitigation. They suggest that we really need to shift our focus from funding a lot of studies of larvae and release of larvae to protection of some of these older, larger, more reproductively active females. And the easiest way to do this is to increase the number and the quality of sanctuaries, areas of preservation of adult oysters throughout the bay. Historically, when it comes to sanctuaries in the Chesapeake Bay, we tend to focus on a hodgepodge of locations and preserve them for maybe 1 or 2 years. But if you really want to protect these larger, reproductively more active females, we need sanctuaries that protect them from harvesting for 5, 6, 7 years so that they can really attain that disease tolerance and that size that we're looking for. The term baseline is very controversial because anytime you're talking about restoring an ecosystem, you have to ask yourself, what am I restoring it to? Is it to the conditions 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Conservation paleobiology takes this idea of a baseline and it basically says, hey, can we use the geologic record? Can we use the fossil record to see what these ecological communities were like before human settlement in an area? How did they function? What sort of abundances and population sizes did you have? How did the food web work before humans came and started building in the area, settling, harvesting, fishing, that sort of thing? So the idea of conservation paleobiology is that the past is the key to the present. If we only study how ecosystems are doing today, we don't get to take advantage of all of the information we have in the geologic record and how these ecosystems have responded to stressors in the past.